We did it.
So it doesn't work on my laptop. I tried.
Oh, got you. Well, we did. I feel like I've achieved a small accomplishment by getting someone to go live on this. Even though this is my 4th time, I feel like I should be able to do it now, but
That's fun.
Very nerve-wracking. I have so much respect for people who do this now. It's very nerve-wracking.
Can you give me 2 seconds to get some AirPods? I didn't know I was going to have to do it on my phone.
Yeah. Go ahead. I'm just going to intro everybody. Hey, y'all. Welcome. Lindsay Speed here. I'm the executive director at Traffic 911. And so this is our last installment for the month. We are it's Human Trafficking Awareness Month, as most of you know, and we just decided this month to talk about demands because not much of the talk is about that. And so we've been talking to a few different people every month, and I saved the best for last. Because I love talking to Joe and I love hearing him just talk about the issue and go on his rants. I told him he's welcome to go on rants tonight. So we shall see. We shall see what happens. But yeah. I mean, I could read a really long bio to just talk about Joe. I know he doesn't want me to. Also, I'm going to call him Joe, but just so you know, he told me I can. I really want to honor him and say Detective Scaramucci, but I'm going to mess up that last name every time, so there we go. But Joe's been in the law enforcement field, I think, for around 16 years now, and has arrested, wait for it, 460 sex buyers. Pretty amazing. 150 human trafficking offenses and some of his stings, recovered or victims identified, 260 victims identified through some of the stings and operations that he's been a part of. And in addition to being a detective and just being this great voice in the field, he's also a human trafficking consultant and travels the United States training law enforcement and different groups on trafficking. And so you're really getting human trafficking 101, 102, 103, 104, 105 tonight, maybe. We shall see. But Waco is blessed to have him. Yes. Some of the best things come out of Waco, apparently. We're all jealous of so many things out of Waco.
It's either it's either really good or really bad.
Well, most of the time people are talking about Chip and Joanna Gaines, but tonight we should all be jealous of Waco because you guys arrest more buyers than anyone I know. And so I think sex buyers are very afraid to purchase sex in Waco, and I think that's what we're trying to all do in the rest of the places. So yeah, it's good stuff. So anyways, thanks for joining. Hope it didn't embarrass
Thanks
you.
for having me. No, not at all.
So, okay, before we get started, tell us just about who is Joe? How did you get in law enforcement? Why human trafficking?
Oh boy. So yeah, I mean, you know, I grew up locally here. Born and raised in Waco. Went to the Marine Corps because back then there was nothing in Waco. Was never coming back, and then came back. Law enforcement, I never intended on law enforcement. Actually, I was a really not great child.
Do you have a rap sheet that we should know about?
I do. I do. But so anyway, so I clearly was never going to be a cop. I didn't like the cops. But luckily I grew up, and I worked my way through that. And I think one day I was like, hey, I think I want to be in law enforcement. And that's what I did. I mean, it was obviously a fairly natural progression going from the military to law enforcement. So,
yeah. How did you get into human trafficking work?
Total accident. Absolute accident. I was the guy that, when they mandated human trafficking training, I was like, this is a waste of my time. We don't have that here. I was literally that dude. So back then I was assigned to our crimes against people division in investigations. So I did everything from dead people cases to, homicide to suicide, child sex, the whole 9 yards. One day on a whim, me and my partner were like, hey, can we do a sting where we have the Chris Hansen type deal, right? And they show up, they're going to have, they're going to meet a kid, and here we are. it was really successful. Our sheriff gave us, hey, go ahead and do it. So we did it. And over the course of time, it just kind of transitioned and rolled a little bit and got more trafficking based. Even that was kind of by accident. And, I feel like we do a good job here. So as we began doing it and really having the support of administration and all, it just naturally kind of fell on our lap.
That's amazing, which is pretty cool that you have the support to do all that you guys do in Waco, because that's not found everywhere. So
it's not, for sure.
That's so cool. Cool. So you and I got a chance to be on a panel together, I don't know, a few months ago, and I love hearing your thoughts just on everything. You have a great take on everything. But before we jump into demand, I just thought we've got to hear from Joe on dispelling some myths, because you just have great wisdom and knowledge on helping people understand the issue and what it is and what it isn't. And it's good. I mean, we need some unapologetic people telling the truth out there. And so what myths would you like to dispel? I have some I want to ask you about that I love hearing your thoughts on. But
there are a million. I'll tell you. Know. Why don't you give me the ones you want that you want my opinion on first, and then I'll back up.
I mean, I would love. I'll just tell you a few things, and then you can go at it. So,
okay.
I mean, I think that people deserve to hear a little bit about the Save the Children movement, what happened with Wayfair, and yeah. I know. I'm sure you talked about it a million times, but people who might be listening. I think there's well-meaning people who have gotten involved in this fight in the last year because of a lot of publicity in the last summer, I would say. And you need to know some facts and myths. And I'm not just saying like, oh, Wayfair didn't traffic kids, like that, but just what the Save the Children, #Save the Children movement has done. Okay, so that's one. I would love for you. I saw a really good rant you had the other day on stats and just
stats are my favorite.
Stats and some of the trafficking information and what are we sharing that's really accurate. And then I like to hear you talk about helping people understand, okay, just because you saw an article in the news that 300 people were arrested in a sting does not mean what you think it means. So There's my 3. Take your pick.
Oh, man, I want to touch at least 2 of them. Wayfair, that's the most idiotic thing in the world. So you brought up a good point. You said, people are coming in with the right. It's making people want to come in and combat trafficking. The problem is they're looking at the wrong thing. I just got a text that I need to get a better hat from Officer Jeff Foley with the Hewitt Police Department. I just went, I should have worn the cowboy hat. So the easiest thing with Wayfair is what makes sense, right? That's the easiest thing with 90% of trafficking work. Does it make sense that Wayfair, a third-party seller, is so involved in some organized crime network that they can get these Russian children in these boxes to the U.S., and I know when I purchase the inflated cost pillow that I'm going to get a kid. That's the most idiotic thing in the history of mankind, right? And when you just look at does this even make sense? One of my favorite people is Judge Judy, and she said one time on her show, "It's a lie." And the guy said, "Well, how do you know?" And she says, "Because it doesn't make sense. And if it doesn't make sense, it's probably not true." With Wayfair, that would have to be such an elaborate scheme that somebody surely along the lines ordered a couch and a little Russian kid popped out and they went, "I think we have a problem here," right? Surely somebody did. So that's kind of idiotic. The whole Epstein thing, the whole Pizzagate, all of that is just, it's nonsense. I mean, obviously Epstein, was a trafficker, don't get me wrong, but all the theories behind it, he shook the guy's hand who owns Campbell Soup or whatever. So then now this guy's a pedophile. Do you not think that maybe one person somewhere along this guy's history was like, "Hey, bro, I don't think that it's okay to buy kids"? Surely somebody did. So That's my take on Wayfair. Obviously, it's
So what do you
false.
think that and the hashtag Save the Children movement has done to this movement that we're all in this?
It's created harm. I mean, really, because I spend a lot of time at my local taqueria, and I was up there one day. I had on my mask when I walked in. It had hashtag Don't Buy Girls on it, and this lady was there, and she was like, "I have questions." I'm like, "Okay, what do you got?" And she was very supportive of the whole hashtag Save the Children. I'm like, well, it's great in theory, but the problem is what you believe is trafficking is not even trafficking. So as long as you're chasing this nonsense over here, you're missing everything over here. And if you're missing everything over here, you're missing trafficking while you think you're actually doing something. Yeah. So, is it good? And people say, well, it brought awareness. Well, okay. But if I'm bringing awareness to something that's not true, or non-existent or a fraction, we're missing the other 99%. So, I think there's pros to it in a small degree, but for the most part, I think hashtag Save the Children, I think all of that really hurt the trafficking world more than it did any good.
Yeah. Interesting.
You brought up stats and numbers.
Yeah. Help people understand. Okay,
if
you're not working in this field, I think you can you trust every website you see, you trust every Instagram story you see, and you go, oh my gosh, this number of trafficking, whatever the stat is you see, and you post it because it's alarming.
Yeah, so I think, and that is, in my opinion, we're just as guilty of it as an anti-trafficking movement, right? Like we all give presentations and we give these stats. I was guilty of it for a long time, and I would give these stats. Hey, the average life expectancy once you become a trafficking victim is 7 years. Where does that come from? The best anybody can ever cite was a study that was done of deceased sex workers. So if we get an average of people that are dead, obviously we're going to have an average life expectancy. But if we're not averaging in the ladies who get out and become 85, that's an unfair number. It's not a good number. Yeah. And you look at, as an example, the average age of entry is 12 to 14 or something. Well, where's that data come from? And the reality is there's not solid information behind that. If you actually look at the self-reported numbers to Polaris, the average age is about 18. Now, that's still bad, don't get me wrong. Yeah. But it's less appealing as 14 if you're looking for, donor money, or if you're looking for that shock and awe and you want people to get upset. Yeah. It's less egregious in a sense. So that. Now, the other one that really irritates me is law enforcement, right? We're the world's worst. You see the thing, U.S. Marshals saved 200 kids in Ohio sting, right? That's the stupidest thing you could ever, that makes zero sense.
I need you to listen to this because I get texts all the time and they send me an article. They're like, did you see this? This is amazing news. Listen right now, okay?
I will tell you exactly what that is. That is the equivalent, and I'm not even kidding, of me going to my department and pulling every runaway case that our department has had in the last year. Say it's 100, I have no idea. Going down that list and finding out how many kids we found and saying we saved 98 kids. That's ignorant, right? So what they don't tell you on the flip side of those operations is I get my checklist, right? And the first person I'm looking for is Lindsay Speed, right? So I go to Lindsay's mom and I'm like, hey, is Lindsay here? And she goes, yeah, she came back yesterday. I found a kid. Right?
Good for you.
We did it. Hey, Lindsay got caught, at the Circle K at 11 p.m. Patrol ran her name. She was a runaway juvenile. She got taken to juvenile detention. Number 2 coming off the list. There was one recently, I think it was in Ohio, that they did, and they said this 16-year-old kid was found, right? And he had a warrant for aggravated robbery and was considered armed and dangerous. That is not a missing potential trafficking victim. That is a criminal on the run. Like, if you're 16 and you robbing people at gunpoint and you're armed and dangerous, you can't really be brought into this. We saved this child.
Mhm.
So the stats on those are really they're crazy. And then the
What
question
about
becomes,
what about the ones where you don't know if it's actually prostitution arrest of, versus perps?
so that's one of my biggest pet peeves. If your law enforcement agency or in your area or anywhere does really that's awesome. We can definitely address all that. So if your agency does an operation to target trafficking and you go out and arrest, say, 100 people, and 2 of those people are pimps, and 3 of those people are sex buyers, and the other 95 are women, statistically speaking, you're locking up a whole lot of victims. And if you're locking up a whole lot of victims, you're not doing anything to help, and you're not doing any anti-trafficking work. You're locking victims of crime up. Yeah. So those we see a lot. People start sharing those like crazy, and it's absurd.
And I would say, well, I guess those are the ones I feel like I see more often, is the ones where, they say this many people arrested, mm-hmm. and it sounds like it's all traffickers being arrested, but what you don't know is how many of those were actually victims charged with prostitution. About that. And then can you look up and see like the everyday Joe Blow? Can we look up and Joe Blow? No fun.
Yeah, most of that, it's all public record, so you can definitely see that. Most of the time the organizations will put that out, right? They'll put the name, the mugshot, and the charge in their deal. So yeah, you can very easily look. If you're looking at the mugshots, because everybody does it, they put all the mugshot array right, and they're like, look what we did, hashtag save the children. And 95% of those are women. That's not a human trafficking operation.
Yeah, that's so real. Okay, yeah. So let's talk about demand.
I love demand.
Yeah, you do. You tend to kind of lead the charge when it comes to arresting the right people. So, yeah, I don't know where to start. Tell us, maybe it would be easier for people to understand, like, tell us some stories about arresting sex buyers, maybe, like help people understand how easy it is. I don't want to say easy, but how you guys how law enforcement can do this if they just put their resources towards something else.
Yeah, and that's where we've been lucky. We travel the country and frankly the world teaching law enforcement best practices and how to identify and recover victims, and how to work with victims after we do recover them, but also how to target demand. So when it comes to demand, here's the thing. So we just talked about the numbers, right? We put up 100 mugshots. So now you do this operation, you get 100 mugshots, right? And 95 of them are women. And then administration comes back and they're like, we want another one. If you're targeting the right people, your numbers are going to decrease substantially, right? If you target traffickers for arrest, you're not having 95 arrests, you're having 10. But that doesn't look as good to administration. So then they're like, hey, why are we doing it? Well, because we're targeting the right people. Which is why we've identified so many victims, because we're not targeting, them for arrest. So the easiest thing to do is say, okay, then who's the other part of this equation that we arrest to get that gap back, right? Well, it's buyers. I can go out, I could post an ad right now, and I can have 20 text messages in the next 20 minutes. So
as a matter of fact, you did that. Joe and I were in Louisiana at this White House summit thing that we went to, and we were supposed to be just having a good old time, learning from all these people, discussing all these roundtable things. And Joe's like, let me throw up an ad and try to arrest someone. And they did.
He literally showed up to the casino where the anti-trafficking, the anti-trafficking conference is going on, and here you come strolling in to literally pay for a 15-year-old kid. It's crazy. So yeah, demand is a very important and overlooked side, and I think that law enforcement, for whatever reason, we shy away from demand. There's something about cleaning up the streets. We got to get the girls off the street, but we're not worried about these guys. I don't know why that's. I don't know. Part of me wonders if it's just cultural. I wish I had that answer, and
a lot of people are going to go to the conspiracy side, which I don't want to say one way or another, because I know there's bad apples in every batch. But I mean, is the reason that there's people involved at the highest levels or something like that?
I mean, so here's the deal. If you're really targeting demand, you're going to get everybody. You're going to get. I mean, I've arrested law enforcement officers at my own department. I've arrested law enforcement officers from Waco PD. I've arrested several cops, unfortunately. I've arrested millionaires. I've arrested business owners. I've arrested all of those people. And that's the thing about it is you start kicking those hornets' nests, you never know who you're going to get. So does that play a role in it? Probably, especially in some smaller communities. I would be willing to bet that it does. But, I think that we as a society still look at gender in a kind of weird way. And we as male law enforcement officers tend to arrest the quote prostitutes, as much as I hate that word, more than the buyers.
Yeah. Is it, I mean, so just to make sure everyone's on the same page, what we're saying is most of the arrests that are being made are either those who are arrested for prostitution, aka victims, and or perpetrators who are involved in the selling of them, or forced fraud, coercion, all of that piece.
Yeah.
But not as much on the actual sex buyer side. And so, do you think? I mean, how much do you think if the narrative was changed around prostitution, that it could affect this?
So I think the narrative, there needs to be several narrative shifts. One of which is what a prostitute is, right? Again, I hate that term. So what is a sex worker? And I've yet to ever meet a female sex worker, trafficking victim, whatever, they're in, and ask, hey, what did you want to be when you were 10? And then say, I wanted to sell myself because I make money. I've not found one. It ultimately becomes a crime of necessity. You literally get to the point where you have nothing else. And what do you have as a female? You got your body, and you got these jacklegs that are willing to pay for it. So I think that narrative needs to shift. I think we need to stop viewing. I was working with a very large department in Texas, and they said, well, we've got to get them off the street and get the streets cleaned up. Well, that's fine. Arrest all the men that are showing up for them and problem solved. They were like, well, what about this particular street? I don't care. Put a patrol car on that street, turn the lights on, and let it sit. Ain't nobody going to go show up trying to buy another person with a patrol car with lights on, right?
Yeah.
So I think that really needs to shift. The other thing that we really have to work on is demand, obviously. And you would be surprised at the amount of men that I ask, hey, how did you find out about this? Well, I was at work. My friend told me. This should be such a taboo conversation that you don't even have. How does a grown man look at another guy and go, hey, dude, so go to this website, blah, blah, blah. This is how you pay. That's crazy. It should be so taboo. You know that it's not happening, but it's not. But the funny thing is, which still kills me, and this is where I get my ultra feminism hat. It's not taboo for the men, but we all talk about the dirty hoe. That makes zero sense to me. How is this person so taboo that we call them these names? We have our opinion on them, and I obviously say that because that's what you hear a lot.
Yeah.
like, how are we doing that in 2021?
Yeah.
Like, that makes no sense to me. So huge shifts have to happen.
That's
there.
real. So what have you learned about buyers? Like you gave us a little bit of a taste just then. Like you're arresting this guy and asking like, how'd you hear about this? And he says, a guy at work told me. Like, what else have you learned that was just like,
makes me very happy.
wait, they what?
They run and fight like nobody's business. Sex buyers here, oh yeah, that's a good day. Those are fun operations because they do tend to want to get away. Yeah, I mean, at least in Waco, Texas, if you get caught buying sex, we are going to put you on the news. Everybody will be, known. So, yeah, I think a lot of them are just scared that that's the case, and they bolt. And I like it when they bolt. When it comes to them as a whole, it honestly surprised me when we first started doing this, how there's no real demographic of buyers when it comes to hotel-based trafficking. When it comes to illicit massage, absolutely. It's a bunch of 30 to 60-year-old white dudes. But when it comes to the hotel-based, I've had 15-year-old kids and I've had 90-year-old men. I've had white, black, Hispanic, Asian, young, old, skinny, fat, wealthy, poor, you name it. I mean, that kind of shocked me because you just don't, you suspect that there's always going to be some kind of like group, and it's literally everybody. It's kind of mind blowing.
So interesting. But there is a demographic when it comes to the massage parlors.
Yeah, massage parlors are a bunch of white dudes that look just like me, right? It's a bunch of, like I said, 30 to 60 is generally what we're seeing. We did get very lucky in an operation we did a couple of years ago now. The owner actually planted hidden cameras inside the rooms of the massage rooms. So part of the cool thing was for one, we had our trafficking documented. But for two, it really gave us it gave us the ability to look and be like, I think we had in excess of 450 men. And I think in all of them, there was like 2 African-American men, maybe 4 or 5 Hispanic guys. Everybody else was white. They were all white dudes, the overwhelming majority wearing wedding rings. So those tend to be different than the hotel-based type stuff.
So will you stop real quick and talk about the massage parlors a little bit? Because I feel like that's a topic we don't talk about very often. We don't, as far as what we do, because that's not typically, but a lot of people want to know, like, well, there's this one down the street from our house, or what to look for, or what do we do? And so, yeah, what does that look like? Just give everyone a little one-on-one on massage parlors.
Yeah, so I love massage parlor discussion because that's something that I've become pretty passionate about and have traveled the world walking through how to work this. They're so overlooked, and the victims are overlooked. And I think because you don't have to look at them, right? If I don't have to look at you, it's difficult to humanize you. If you have the one on your street, and what I like to tell people, if you can't see into the lobby, think about Massage Envy. If you're walking down the street and you get to Massage Envy, usually you can see into the lobby from the exterior. Now you can't see beyond that, but you can see in. If you can't see in, does it mean it's trafficking? Not necessarily. Is it starting to give some visual indicators? It is. If you sit outside for 10 minutes, now I am a man, obviously, and I get massages. And when I do go get massages, the overwhelming majority of the other people in the building are not men. So when it's a constant flow of dudes, and they're white guys between 30 and 60-ish, that right there should be the biggest red flag. And it doesn't take long to figure that out. If you see them and, they open up at 10 and you just happen to be down the street and 10 o'clock, the light kicks on from the inside and nobody's pulled up and got out of a car, they're living there. And if they're living there, we really got a problem. So those are definitely some of the main red flags. When it
Yeah.
comes to that form of trafficking, it's big money. The money is crazy. Again, the victims are overlooked. When they're not overlooked, the victims are usually arrested. That's the sad, truth of it.
And
Um,
deported.
yeah, it's well, you say that in illicit massage, they're typically Chinese and are at least for the most part either seeking political asylum or
Okay.
they are legal permanent residents and oftentimes also citizens at that point. So there's not a ton of deportation from it, but
Okay.
I mean, obviously it does happen, but there are threats of deportation. So that's a huge coercive mechanism when it comes to the trafficker, threatening them because, I mean, and the reality is, political opinions aside, for the last 4 years, if you broke the law and you were here illegally, you were getting deported. I mean, that's a fact. And so that's a very real threat then. It's not even one that's made and you got to like weigh out what's the risk. That was a real fact. So, yeah, I mean, that's a huge threat.
No, I think it's helpful for people to know just because I mean the massage parlors that we see, I mean, at least up here in DFW all around, I mean, they're in every neighborhood. And I mean, is one of the signs too that like they stay open way later
obscene hours, yeah,
than normal.
Yeah, I really wish they would. There's some city ordinances that that prohibit hours of operation. There's no reason to be at a massage parlor at midnight. Like people don't get massages at midnight. So if you do see them and they're, that constant flow of men is going until late in the evening, um, that's a problem. When we did,
should they make a tip to the trafficking hotline or law enforcement just so that people know, like, hey, I don't want this in my neighborhood?
Yeah, I think local law enforcement is the way to go for the most part. You would be surprised how many, even in the DFW area, don't have direct connections to the National Trafficking Hotline. So, and I'm just using a city as an example because I have no idea, but we'll just say Arlington as an example. They may not have a designated person that the hotline knows to get in communication with. They may be routed around 15 times before it even makes it to the wrong desk. So if you see it, I would definitely always recommend doing that, but also contacting, the departments directly and filing a complaint. Yeah. Plus, if they know that the citizens care, it puts heat on them to do something.
Yeah. And there's some really good legislation that's continuing to come out about massage parlors. And so we won't stick on that, but I think that was a helpful topic. What about strip clubs? Because, I mean, we're talking about demand. You just mentioned the typical clientele or buyer base for massage parlors. Then we have strip clubs. Personally, we worked with a lot of underage girls who have been exploited in strip clubs, back rooms, things like that. I mean, how do strip clubs kind of play into all this from your perspective?
I think any kind of sex work plays into trafficking, right? I mean, you can't. It's so difficult to have any form of sex work with no trafficking. When it comes to the strip clubs, I don't want to say easier to get away with.
Brett is cracking me up right now. I
can't believe you, Brett. Oh God. I just, I dream big and read books. So back to the strip clubs.
Anyway, strip clubs.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it almost makes it to where it's hidden in plain sight because it is, in a sense, legal sex work. I don't want to say that it's the same, but it does provide the opportunity for things to at least start navigating that way. So yeah, that's definitely not a good thing when it comes to trafficking.
What you've learned about buyers, I mean, would you say from a lot of what I've heard and learned over the years, there's this progression that often happens, very often starting out in pornography, that could lead to, maybe going to a sexually oriented store that may then lead to strip clubs that may then lead to purchasing sex. Like what have you seen even in your experience in talking with sex buyers about kind of maybe that progression, and do strip clubs kind of play a part in some of that?
For sure. And I don't honestly, now that I saw Brett was on here, I mean, to me, he's the go-to guy for all things strip clubs and trafficking, and buyers. I'm kind of torn on the pornography issue. I feel like we could get 100 people in here that we're coming to pay for sex, and we can ask 100, hey, do you watch porn, right? And 100 people are going to be like, yeah, absolutely. But we could take 100 just random people that watch porn and be like, hey, do you pay for sex? And we may have a few that are like, yeah, I do. The others are probably not. I think it definitely creates an environment where it's a gateway, of course. So if you're, doing this and then you progress, like you said, you end up in the strip club, and then from the strip club, you end up paying for either somebody there or down the road. It's one of those things that, again, some of the data is kind of interesting, because if you only poll a certain group of people, the answer is going to obviously be pretty distorted. It's going to be high. Can we ask 100 people that got arrested for sex buying, have you been to a strip club in the last 5 years, right? And probably a good chunk are going to say yes, I would assume. But if you were to ask 100 people that went to a strip club, hey, have you purchased sex in the last 5 years? I feel like the number would be a little different.
No, that's fascinating. That's interesting.
So it doesn't. I don't think it helps. Don't get me wrong.
But it's hard to define it, because data and research is just
data's hard. I mean,
growing.
Yeah, data's hard, and the reality is, a lot of the data is skewed. I mean, it's skewed, or it's non-existent, or hell, there's one that people reference a lot. And when you actually look at the study, it was a 1999 study done by the University of Pennsylvania that literally refers to child prostitutes. Mm-hmm. We know now that's not even a thing, but we still cite some of those things. So the data around buyers, I think, here's another thing, and this is where I really want to partner more heavily with Brett and them. So they do the Stop Demand School, right?
Yeah, I was going to get to that. Yes, go.
So let's look at this from a data perspective. If we look at society, we can say that, and there are many arguments that say African-American men are treated less fair within the justice system than Caucasian men, right? So if that's the case, then if I arrest 100 people, say 50 are African-American and 50 are Caucasian, to get to Brett's school, you have to have a clean record. You can't have a prior felony. Now, if this group is treated more harshly by the justice system, we may get down to smaller numbers of people that are even eligible to go to Brett's school, right?
Explain what the Stop Demand School is, and because it's amazing.
It really is. They bring in survivors. They bring in, I believe, parents. They bring in the medical, to talk about all of these things and essentially educate buyers on what they're actually doing. Like, you are contributing to human trafficking.
So if a buyer is arrested in McLennan County with a certain charge, I'm assuming, then
prostitution.
With a prostitution charge, then they have to go to the Stop Demand School, which is kind of known in this field called the John School. We don't know what to call it that, but it's kind of what it's known as. Then these sex buyers are arrested as a part of their whatever criminal justice words. They have to go to the Stop Demand School.
Yes, in many cases.
Okay.
So they do that like as a condition of probation, or something, part of their pretrial. Essentially, it's pretrial intervention. You complete this, you do these things, you do all this, the charge goes away, right? So if we're looking at this from that perspective, the more solid data is going to be at point of arrest. I would love for them to be there with us to get their information then, because this guy may not have the ability to go to Stop Demand School. So you're never going to get data from him. And I think that'll provide much deeper, real, I say real, but the best that we can.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think it's interesting because, well, just so people know, I mean, you can hear, I mean, you've been in this field a while. I've been in this field a while. Data is so hard to use, and we have been guilty over the years of using just abusing stats, I would say, because there's so little out there. And so what we do now, I mean, at least at Trafficking 911, what we try to do is say, based on our experience, blank. Based on the victims that we've served blank. Based on this, it's just, I mean, it's not perfect, but at least it's accurate to us versus like, you know, trying to overgeneralize what's happening across the whole nation. So in taking that approach, based on Joe's experience, who purchases kits? Is it any different than any other? Because I mean, this goes into a little bit of an interesting, I guess, education for people on. I mean, I may be working with a 16-year-old victim, but maybe she was posted as an 18-year-old and all of that interesting web. But have you seen any difference of sex buyers, of who wants to purchase a 15-year-old, like you said, when you posted the fake ad versus a 25-year-old?
Overwhelmingly, no. I will say that there tends to, at least in what we've seen, for the ones that are paying for minors, I've seen less African American men than I have Caucasian and Hispanic. But not so much so that we can say, you know, like whatever. But
I do want to say, based on Joe's experience, you know, we're doing Joe data right now. You've been a part of stings all over the nation. So yeah, a lot of your experience comes from Waco. But just so you know, when he talks, he's been a part of stings all across the nation. So I think it's valid what he's seen.
Yeah. So as an example, in December we did one in Mississippi with the state police out there, and I want to say it was in one day we had, and they were purchasing children. And one day we had 5 people. I want to say 4 of which were Caucasian. One was African American. I just saw that they did another operation kind of subsequent to that. And I think they arrested 20 people. And I believe the overwhelming majority of those were Caucasian as well. So, you know, it's tough.
That's interesting.
But I think if we were to look overall at all the operations we've ever done, you know, it's definitely all, you know, all races that, you know, are doing this. And, you know, guys as young as 18 and guys as old as dirt.
So what's working? What's working? What's not working? Oh, yeah. Let's answer Chrissy's question real quick. Is that wealth income?
Massage parlors. Look at Robert Kraft, right? So there's something about massage parlors. I think the thing about it is that it costs a little bit more because not only are you paying for the sexual act, but you're also paying for a massage. So you have to have a little bit more expendable income. And the thing about those, the safest thing to do really is show up to a massage parlor, because if you show up to Motel 6, you run the risk of me being on the other side of the door. Where if you walk into a massage parlor and I'm standing there, you're going to be like, oh, sorry, I wanted a massage, but not from a guy. And you leave, right? You're free and clear. Most law enforcement agencies don't have Asian victims or Asian officers that they can use as, you know, and they're not going to get these guys naked and give them massages as part of undercover. So,
so you think some of the higher income buyers oftentimes go to massage parlors?
It's safer. It's more hidden, you know. It does cost a little bit more. So, yeah, those we definitely see in those venues.
So talk about what's working and what's not. I mean, just in the anti-demand side of things, I mean, what would you want people to know? Do you know what I mean? About like fighting demand and what's working and what's not.
The lack of fighting demand is not working, right? I mean, it's true. You know, we monitor John boards, obviously, and I said the sex buyer boards, and very common. I'll get on there, and it makes me feel good when they're like, I'm not doing this in Waco. I go elsewhere. You know, at least you're not doing it here. So my thing is, if we're going to kick the can and you're going to go to Dallas as an example, if Dallas can make it so hostile, then you're going to go to Fort Worth. If Fort Worth can make it hostile, eventually you're going to run out of places to go. We did an operation in another jurisdiction, and this guy shows up, and of course we snatch a hold of him. And I pulled out his driver's license, and I was like, from Waco? Yeah. Why are you here? He said, man, it's hot there. They'll arrest you. I was like, well, Mr. Waco's here.
You were so proud.
Yeah, he was like,
how could he have ever known he would come face to face with a Waco detective
in another city,
North Texas?
So it's just, I think the biggest thing is, um, not doing it. I mean, you have to target demand. One of the other ones, and there's some conflicting theories on this. The public shame factor of putting them on the news, and there are studies that say the number one deterrent to buying sex is the fear of being outed. Um, the Some people say, well, no, that's not right. But I can tell you this: we have hindered demand here. We have made a dent in it, a very large dent.
Yeah.
And if you're scared to do it here, you're either not going to do it or you're going to do it somewhere else. And like I said, if we can continue that elsewhere, then that'll help, do something.
But just because you're arresting them doesn't mean they're all shamed, right? Or how do you feel
if you get arrested for prostitution in our county, you're absolutely going to be put on the news.
Okay.
Yeah, there is no. If you get arrested for prostitution here, we're gonna make you Facebook famous. And it does deter. I mean, it really does. So, at least from what we're seeing, somebody just asked what the buyer numbers look like in DFW area. So compared to, right? One thing I will say is this: you see, and this goes back to data, right? So we all talk about all this, like we extrapolate everything. Where you have higher concentrations of people, you're going to have higher buyer concentration. So that's tough because
population.
Population. What did I say?
No, yeah, I was just saying basically a population thing.
If you have 100,000 people in one city and 5 million in another, you're going to have higher trafficking in the 5 million. But that doesn't necessarily mean that if we look per capita and we were able to break all that down, it would probably start kind of evening out a little bit more. So I don't think that the DFW area has a ton more than anybody else of comparable size.
It's everywhere.
Everywhere, yeah.
Yeah, and it's probably a tad bit. I mean, would you say it's a tad bit easier to make a dent in it in somewhere like Waco that is a little bit more of a smaller jurisdiction than?
Yeah, I mean, DFW. The thing about it is, and I monitor ad response all over the state, right? So, I mean, we're not just looking at ad response in Waco; we're looking everywhere. Mm-hmm. The number one area code, I kid you not, for ad response, and the people that know me are going to hate this stat or from there, is Beaumont. 409. 409. You can post an ad right now, 409, 30 seconds, your phone's going to ding, and you're going to have more buyer numbers that are 409 than you will anywhere else in the state. But again, you're looking at a high concentration of, and that's where you have to start looking at other things. What are the reasons? Same reason you have out in Midland. You got people with oil. You got dudes that are there without their wives and their girlfriends. They got a little money in their pocket and they got nobody around. So there's actually kind of, it seems like higher concentration of buying in some of those areas, Victoria, than you would in some others.
Would you point any of that? I know someone asked a little bit earlier about the trucking industry. What would you say about that?
I mean, obviously we see trafficking in the trucking industry, right? So I actually just saw a deal earlier with somebody that had some girls at a truck stop. It happens. I think the biggest thing is again, this goes back to how we view these women, right? And this guy's post, as sad as it is, it said something like, "Hey, it's the lot lizards," or we got to quit looking at people like that. We have to quit identifying them as something, inappropriate or gross. And it's okay, fine. So they're doing what they're doing, whether they're being trafficked or not. How do we help that situation and putting it out on the feeling and help it? So, especially the trucking industry, I would say, when you see these women walking, I mean, you know what they're doing. Do something. Don't just sit there and pretend like, oh, it's just this problem over there. Do something about it.
Yeah, that's good. So in DFW, let's just take DFW for example, because that's where we are. To address demand here, I'll just go publicly and say I don't feel like enough is being done here in DFW to address demand.
I agree 100%.
So where would you start? I mean, I don't want to call any partners or anything out like that, but like,
Yeah.
I mean, is it kind of more the county level, the local level, the federal level? Like what maybe agency would make the biggest bang or have the resources to make the biggest dent in demand?
Resources isn't an issue.
Okay.
We lead sheer number, when it comes to arrest of buyers. That I will say. I mean, I don't know of any other officer that, at least in our state, that has arrested as many buyers as we have. We do it with two people. So it doesn't require a lot. I mean, obviously, any of the departments up in that area have more than two people. I think the biggest thing is federally, no. You're looking at, state level misdemeanor cases. The feds aren't going to mess with that. Although they do provide a lot of great partnership. I mean, we work with HSI, and they, even on our misdemeanor stuff, they'll come out and, help. So those resources are available. But I think the biggest thing is local. You got to get your local PDs and your sheriff's offices to jump on board. How
do you get buy-in? I mean, if someone lives in, let's just call out Collin County.
Okay.
And it's like, man, I would really love for some of these white guys who are 30 to 60 attending all these massage parlors in Plano to be arrested. Like, what would they do?
I think persistence pays, right? So the biggest thing is it's once that ball gets rolling, because I'll tell you how cops are, right? We're arrogant. And we want to be better than everybody else. So who would?
Shocking to hear.
So if I do something and it's good, the cops over here are going to be like, I want to do that because it looked good. So it's just getting it started. And I'm just throwing cities as an example. You said Plano. So we'll say start with Plano. And then if I live in Richardson, I'm going to Richardson chief or, whoever's would be doing trafficking or the administration and going, look what they just did. Why aren't you doing this? Why is this massage parlor open? Why don't you care? Because they care. And then they look generally and they're like, man, that looked good. Okay, let's do something. So then they get rolling. And then it just manifests in cycles from there.
Yeah. It's like a popularity contest.
For sure. Especially when it's good news, right? We see all the negative things that law enforcement does. So when you get positive publicity.
Yeah. Well, and I think there's this reverse HR or PR thing that happens that people have got to get over that says, oh, well, we don't want to do that because then people will find out there's buyers here in our county. It's like, look, there's buyers in every county. You are not special,
No, I've worked in some very rural jurisdictions, and it's happened there. The thing about it is that I think people don't want to dump the resources because they're like, well, it's misdemeanors. Well, it's not misdemeanors. It's human lives. That's a fact. If it's not me in a hotel room, it's a potential victim. So let's stop worrying about if it's a Class A misdemeanor, and let's look at the fact that these guys are paying for human beings, and maybe deal with that on a more moral level than a felony or misdemeanor level. Yeah.
So then saying that, I mean, I think I heard through Children at Risk that there's some new legislation trying to get passed that will make it maybe a first degree felony or first time felony or something.
Yeah.
Is that going to help?
Yeah. So there's a few things with that. So I'll discuss my opinion. There's discussion about making sex buying a state jail felony. That's the lowest level felony that you have. I think it would be great. It would do a couple things. For one, it would make, if you show up to purchase sex, it makes your vehicle and your money seizable. So we can take that as law enforcement. And not only do I tow it, we own it. So that's a really big financial deterrent.
That'll make someone's wife ask questions.
Yeah. So I think that it would be a good thing. I'm in 100% support of the decriminalization, not legalization, the decriminalization of sex selling. So I think we need to make it where cops can no longer arrest you and put you in jail for being a victim. But we need to hold these guys accountable on a felony level. The problem is this, and I'm just going to call a spade because this is what I do. Who purchases sex in many, many venues? Wealthy men. Who funds legislators? Wealthy men. So if I purchase sex and I know it, I'm going to my buddy, the state rep, and I'm like, hey, we don't need this. And, you know, the problem is that you've got lobbyists that are, you know,
Up against a brick wall.
So this discussion came up last legislative cycle. I hope it gets stronger this time, but obviously didn't pass.
Interesting, man.
Yeah, state jail would be good. Have a felony offense for that.
So I think that's helpful just because we didn't get to talk about too much about laws, but the legislative session did just begin. Mm-hmm. And if you want to get really nerdy about legislative stuff, it's important. And there's some laws out there that can increase the level of whatever it's called, blah, blah, blah. I'm not a police officer, sex spying charge. And that can help departments, I would say, because then so-and-so PD is not worried about blank number of misdemeanors. They're more excited about blank number of felonies. And so this is why we should, you know, learn about these laws and at least kind of call your local legislator and be like, hey, I want this one passed. Like, that's something everyone can do.
Yeah. There's one on the table right now I saw that got introduced that would make it a requirement for a victim to prove she was a victim before they could move forward on trafficking. I cannot wait to start jumping on desks on that one because that's the most idiotic thing I've ever heard in my life.
Yeah, I've heard some interesting ones. But okay, so we're going to get into a couple Q&A. We might go a little bit over, but I hope you guys don't mind. This is
totally fine.
But before we do, I would just love to hear from you. So many things. What's been the most impactful thing doing this work? Like, to you personally, what's been the most impactful?
That's twofold kind of answer. So one, I had a victim that middle of the night, one night, long while past, I got a Facebook message pop up. I mean, obviously my name's not hard to find. And it was a very lengthy Facebook message about how what I had done had saved her life and just all of the great things that she was doing now. So it was really cool to know not only did we get you away from this, but you were able to really build a good life, you know, beyond that. So that kind of a singular issue. I think the biggest, honestly, for me is training and being able to work with law enforcement all over the country. And, you know, I said it a million times. I can go out and recover 10 victims of trafficking this month, right? I can find 10. But if I can teach 10 people to do the same, that impact is huge. You know, now we're getting 100 a month.
Yeah.
And it's really cool and it's very rewarding because I obviously Google alert all sorts of stuff. But when I see other states, other, you know, jurisdictions that they pop up, right? And they're like, hey, we did an operation. This is what came of it. This is blah, blah, blah. And I know that we had a direct impact in them doing that. That is huge. That's a big, big reward, I think, when it comes to that.
I love it. It's amazing. And if you ever want to follow along on some of Joe's work on the consultant side, he works a lot with a group called Collective Liberty. And you can follow them on like LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram. And they talk about a lot of the trainings they do across the nation and the law enforcement agencies that then go out and do all these amazing arrests from their training.
Yeah, it's cool. So those trainings are fun because we actually set up law enforcement to build cases in the training. So when they walk away, they've got, I mean, you're like, right. Hey, you've got it right there. You walked out of this with the ability to go put somebody in jail. Yeah, it's a good time.
I love it. That's so good. Okay, well, this is a really good question at the bottom. We'll start with that one. What do you recommend if you suspect a woman in their life is being trafficked?
For one, to have a little bit of grace. We like to still victim blame, even if it's a family member. But I would definitely encourage reporting to law enforcement, but empowerment, right? It's easy to say, don't be trafficked. Everybody knows, hey, don't be trafficked. That's a bad thing. Don't do this. Don't do that, right? Fine. What are you going to do to help me? What are you going to do to stop the vulnerability that put me in this to begin with? It's easy to say, hey, let's get you away from trafficking. Fair. But now what? And if we don't stop, and if we don't, I was, talking back to my SWAT days, if we don't plug that bullet hole, it's going to keep bleeding. Yeah. So we've got to stop it. And the only way to do that is through empowerment, sustainable income, housing, all of those things. So
letting them know there's options.
Yeah. Don't just report it. Do what you can to help fix the problem to begin with.
Yeah. I've walked with a lot of girls over the years, and I think the biggest thing is that you are non-judgmental, and that you're just like, hey, I'm here for you for the long haul. We're going to walk this out together, and and them always knowing that there's options, like, hey, there's a place here that could house you. Hey, there's a place here I know that would give you a job. Like that would make me think twice, and so that's really good. I don't know if I know the exact bill number for that, John, that sex buyer. Okay.
I saw that. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know.
We can look it up, and we'll post it in these comments later when we post this. Let's see here. Someone was asking. Brett was sharing stats.
Yeah, I mean, he's the go-to, I think, for all of that.
Yeah, feel free to check out Jesus Said Love is the name of their organization. They're in Waco, work alongside Joe, and do the Stop Demand School, and they're incredible. It's jesussaidlove.org or .com. If we want to make the biggest difference in human trafficking market as far as destroying it, where would you make... Okay, this is interesting. Donor wanting to make their biggest investment in the human trafficking market as far as destroying it. Oh, this is hard. There's about 500 different legs because this issue is so complex. But from your perspective, do not feel pressured to say anything. I'm just telling you. I mean, I don't think you would, but... Research.
If you're going to donate money, make sure you're giving it to an organization that's actually doing work. That said, if they're throwing a bunch of statistics and they're a bunch of shock and awe, where does those numbers come from? And there are people in this field, obviously there was one earlier that will disagree with this because that's what they know as gospel. Find where the studies come from, not who says it. So if Polaris says, where did they get that number? Because what ultimately happens is all the NGOs then can cite, as an example, Polaris being the National Human Trafficking Hotline, right? Well, this is where we're getting it from. So we're not going to share the ones that don't get as much attention because those don't do donors, right? If you have organizations that are giving these big rescue stories, question that. Who rescues? We don't, for sure, as law enforcement. NGOs do, I think. Well, really, the survivor does, but with help of the NGOs.
We hate using that word, but yeah.
If they're doing the old Operation Underground Railroad, hey, we're going to Cambodia and having this photo op with some kids that we just saved, that's not the case. Law enforcement is who goes and does that. If they tell you something that's all this shiny crystal ball stuff, we need $1 million to renovate the back page office because we are setting up shop in there. Find out who is in that building. Don't just go with what you're being told. Do your research because you would be surprised as to what you're actually going to find out. So I just say that to say, if it's pretty and shiny, do a little digging. And if, there's no hard stat, what's the impact? I see you guys all the time. You're like, hey, 3 victims of trafficking recovered tonight. That's impact. If you say we went out and helped the victims, well, great. How many? Right? So really asking for the measurable impact. And if you're a donor, they're going to show you. Yeah. If they have it, if I came to you and was like, hey, Lindsay, I have $1 million. I want to give Traffic 911. You're going to be like, hey, this is the sheer number of people we helped this year. Yeah. Not some blanket, whatever. So that would be my biggest thing.
And I'll say, as an executive director, to get really nerdy with donors, go look at their tax 990s. Go look at their tax form. see how they're spending their money, ask questions about their operations, because you can learn so much. 990s, every organization's 990 is out there on the internet for you to Google. You can find out
publicly
right now
available
exactly how much money they spent last year and on what. And so I would love people to be informed, because I think it's hard, because there's these huge national and global organizations, some doing great work,
totally.
but people will just kind of get on this bandwagon and and so I think it's important to be informed, and you want to be an informed share of information, but also an informed donor. And so I think that's really good. Okay,
especially if you're donating, because the reality is, if you're donating to trash organizations, you're not donating to organizations that are actually doing the work, that need the money. So that's another thing, huge.
Yeah, no, it's real. There's a few different questions that came in earlier. So one person said, okay, we haven't touched on this. We can make this one the last one. How can we as organizations help fill the gap law enforcement can't?
So that's tough. So this is where law enforcement has to rely on the NGOs, right? So, and I break it down very simply. Everybody in law enforcement talks about being victim-centered. Victim-centered is not my problem. I hate to say that. It's not. I shouldn't be victim-centered. You should be victim-centered. I need to be trauma-informed, and we need to meet in the middle, right? So my job is to not support victims. I can identify them, then turn them with the NGOs. My job is to point guns at bad people, rip them out of their car, and put them in prison. So being the support mechanism for law enforcement is the biggest thing. We work heavily here with Unbound. They're in the hotel room with me. So when I say, hey, how you doing, sheriff's office? I need you to go talk to my friend over here. I'm done. And that is so important. And that role that they play is just, that's what makes the difference between people saying I've made 200 arrests and I've made 3 for trafficking versus I've made, 150 trafficking arrests and not a ton of misdemeanor stuff. So the biggest thing is really, especially from the NGO side, if you say you're going to do something, you absolutely have to do it. The first time as a cop.
When Joe says NGO, he means nonprofit organization or non-governmental organization. FYI, he means nonprofit.
If I call a nonprofit who has told me, if you have a 16-year-old that's addicted to crack, we will help. And I call them and say, hey, I have a 16-year-old that's addicted to crack. And they go, well, can you put them in a hotel for tonight? And then let's see what we can do. Oh, sorry, we only take ones that smoke crack, not weed. I'm never going to call you again. It's just not going to happen, right? So the biggest thing is just making sure that you're there for whatever your role is. Make sure you're there for that.
That's good. That's good. Oh, I love it. We could go on and on. I know we're already 10 minutes over. Anything else? Last words?
Yes.
Tell me.
We have to have when it comes to sex buying, we have to have a culture shift. Like I said earlier, it should be so taboo that you can't go to work and be like, hey, dude, where do I find this? People say we can end trafficking in our lifetime. I don't believe that that's true, to be honest with you. But what I can tell you is I think that over time we can. And if we start teaching our boys, and I say this as a father of a teenager, that supporting women is cool and that not victimizing them is even cooler, we'll have that slow change. And right now, we have a culture where obviously sex buying is prevalent. So teaching young men to keep their hands to themselves and that it's really a good thing to stand up for more alongside with women, that shift of kind of power will change and it no longer becomes men and women that are involved in this. It starts becoming human beings. And I think that's the biggest thing is that, gender aside and sexuality aside, we're such a segregate society that it's still men and women. And great, sexually, I get it. But when we're talking about empowerment, we really need to be empowering our vulnerable men or women, but then also teaching the men that we really should not be doing some of the male things that we do.
So good. So good. And like you said, that long term will end this issue. I mean, it will. It's like what people say, you can't arrest your way out of this.
No, but if we can teach our boys that they need to be men and help other humans, and they can teach theirs, eventually it's gonna cycle. It's just getting there. We're not gonna change the world in one day, but I think we can over a couple generations.
Yeah. Well, you're on your way to it. Let me just tell you, Joe. I mean, you really are inspiration. So thanks for all you do. It's
Totally
incredible. And if people want to, Joe has a Facebook page that's kind of more on like the blog side or whatever. He shares all of his rants that are so good. And if you Google Joseph Scaramucci human trafficking information, I found it. Then you can find him. Or go follow him on LinkedIn. He posts a lot over on there. But I
ask for data. I don't. Yeah. So to even add, I don't just say, "Hey, look, this is false." I'm like, show me where it's true. And
there's some good threads on there.
Can I mention or answer this real quick? I know we're way over, but consent's such a huge topic, sometimes misused and understanding. What are your thoughts? This is coming from a male, right? Consent is a beautiful thing. It is misunderstood. I feel like even pressuring somebody, I can pressure you to consent to something. And you can say, well, I'll do this, right? Female. Sometimes misuse.
Oh, you were saying this is coming from a male. You meant like you, not her.
Yeah, me.
Yeah.
So consent is something that, I just think we need to realize is, what is the circumstances around consent? And, is somebody just saying, oh, I'm good with this? Is that consent? Be a little dicey with it. Why are we in the position that we're in? And I think that is such a huge deal that we overlook, but we do misunderstand, kind of like what she said, in that, we've had cases where the female says, well, I felt like I had to consent. Well, then that's not consent. You feel like you have to consent, that's not consent. So I think that's huge. And I think the other
what if
thing
they're underage?
Then it doesn't matter. You go straight to prison.
Thank you. But I think that people, like, truly, I've sat with people here in our office who are like, yeah, but like, they don't understand that if they're 16 and they're choosing this, then it's still, you know what I mean? That's not consent. But people don't get that.
Yeah. No, definitely for minors, that's an easy one. You don't have the ability to consent. But when it comes to grown-ups, I think the thing is, what is the circumstances surrounding the consent? And that really has to be evaluated,
individually.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Which makes it so complex to just put these blanket statements out there and decriminalization or, all these things where it's so much harder, to really understand the issue like that. And and Becca talked about it a little bit in our last Instagram Live. If you want to go back and watch that one, anyone who's kind of wanting to know about the fight against, like, should states be kind of full decrim is what they're calling it, or partially decrim, all these things on prostitution and consent and sex work. It's a really complex thing. So do your research for sure.
Yeah, and understand the difference between decrim and legalization, because they're two completely different things, and people don't really see that. So
that's good. That's good. All right. Well, I will let you go on your Sunday night. We moved this because I was just like, I think a lot more people are able to tune in on Sunday night. So thanks for taking your Sunday night with us. And
totally. Thank you for having me. Seriously.
We'll have
especially
to do it again.
Like with people like Becca and all them. Jesus. I mean, like, that's big shoes to walk in behind.
She's great. I know. Yeah. All right. See you guys. Thanks for tuning in. Bye.